The wind howled down the empty street, chasing scraps of paper and the smell of wet asphalt through the maze of morning traffic. The city was still waking up, lights flickering in office towers, buses sighing to a halt, horns impatiently blaring. People hurried, shoulders hunched against the cold, each one moving with purpose, eyes fixed on their destination. Only one figure didn't move. Arthur sat by the corner of an old convenience store, wrapped in a threadbare coat that had long since lost its battle with the cold. His face was rough with an uneven beard, his hands trembling as he cupped them around an empty paper cup. Each breath hung in the air like smoke before dissolving into nothing. He had stopped expecting much from people, or from life. A few coins clinked faintly inside the cup, reminders of passing glances and fleeting pity. Mostly, there was silence. The world had grown deaf to men like him. Once, he had been part of it, working hands that built tables and chairs, laughter that filled a warm home, arms that held a sleeping child. That was before the layoffs, before the debts, before the hospital took everything he loved and left him with memories that hurt to remember. He rubbed his fingers together to chase away the numbness. It didn't help. The ache in his bones was deeper than the cold. He stared blankly at the crowds moving past, the young woman with earbuds, the delivery man balancing 3 cups of coffee, the teenage boy laughing with friends. They were all living. He was only surviving. Across the street, Ethan was already late. He adjusted his scarf, tightened his grip on his coffee, and jogged toward the crosswalk. He worked in one of those offices with glass walls and fluorescent lights where deadlines replaced dreams. Most days, he didn't notice much beyond his schedule, clients, calls, and caffeine. As he stopped at the curb, waiting for the light to change, his eyes flicked toward the old man by the store. He'd seen him before, every morning, in that same spot, still as a statue. For a moment, their eyes met. Arthur's gaze wasn't pleading, not even expectant, just tired, hollow, the kind of look that stayed with you long after you turned away. Ethan looked down at his coffee, steam curling through the cold. He thought about the $10 he'd spent on breakfast, about the meeting he was already late for, about the homeless man who probably sat there all day. Then the voice of reason spoke up in his head, "You can't help everyone. You have your own problems. Keep moving." The light turned green. People surged forward, a tide of motion. Ethan followed for a few steps, the rhythm of the crowd carrying him. But halfway across, he stopped. The thought came quietly, almost like a whisper from somewhere deep inside, if you were in his place, wouldn't you want someone to stop? He turned around. The people behind him grumbled as he stepped back onto the curb. Ignoring the traffic, ignoring the cold, he crossed the street again until he was standing in front of the old man. Arthur looked up slowly, startled, as if he wasn't sure this young stranger was real. "Morning, sir," Ethan said, awkwardly. "Have you eaten today?" Arthur blinked, eyes narrowing in confusion. His voice came out rough, fragile. "Not since yesterday." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then knelt beside him, placing his coffee and a wrapped sandwich into the man's shaking hands. "Here. It's not much, but it's warm." Arthur stared down at the offering. His fingers trembled as they touched the cup. The heat stung his palms, but he didn't care. He hadn't felt warmth like that in weeks. He looked up, eyes glistening. "You don't even know me," he said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why it matters." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city noise faded into the background, horns, footsteps, voices, all distant compared to the simple, silent exchange happening between two strangers. Arthur finally whispered, "Thank you." The words came from somewhere deep, cracked and raw. Ethan nodded, rising to his feet. "Take care of yourself, all right?" "I will," the old man said, though he wasn't sure how. He watched as Ethan turned and disappeared into the crowd, the bright color of his scarf fading among the gray coats and umbrellas. Arthur lifted the lid of the cup and inhaled the smell of coffee, rich, real, human. He took a sip, and it burned his tongue, but the pain was beautiful. The sandwich followed, soft and fresh, each bite reminding him of things he'd long forgotten: taste, comfort, kindness. A small smile tugged at his lips. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him, really looked, like he was still a person. The warmth in his chest spread slowly, thawing the ice that had formed there over years of loneliness. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. The city still rushed on, uncaring, but something had shifted inside him. He remembered the workshop he used to have, the smell of sawdust, the sound of his daughter's laughter as she helped him paint. He thought about how, once upon a time, he had helped others too, fixing their doors, building their tables, giving them something made with care. Maybe he could do that again. Maybe he could still be useful. The thought startled him. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to imagine a future. But now, with warmth in his belly and a stranger's words echoing in his mind, he began to believe, just a little, that tomorrow might still hold something good. The day passed slowly. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet, Arthur still sat there, but his posture was different. His shoulders weren't slumped. His gaze wasn't empty. When another passerby dropped a coin into his cup, he looked up and said, "Thank you," with genuine warmth. He finished the last sip of coffee, still hot enough to comfort him. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the coming night. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Maybe tomorrow, I'll find a way to stand again." The stranger's kindness had lasted only a minute, but its warmth would stretch far beyond that, through the night, through the weeks to come, until one day it would ripple back in ways neither man could yet imagine. And somewhere across the city, Ethan hurried through the office doors, unaware that his small act of compassion had just reignited a man's will to live, and that, one day, that same kindness would return to him when he needed it most. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of the little cafe on the corner, each drop blurring the gray world outside into streaks of motion. Ethan sat by the window, watching umbrellas move past like slow, tired ghosts. His coffee sat untouched, gone cold hours ago. He didn't really taste food anymore. Or much of anything. 3 years had passed since that winter morning, the one where he'd stopped for a stranger. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. He'd gone on with his day, his job, his life. But life, he had learned since then, could change directions without warning. The company he had worked for folded during a market crash, swallowing his position overnight. His savings had barely lasted 6 months. One rejection followed another, job interviews that started with polite smiles and ended with the same hollow phrase, "We'll be in touch." Now, the days blurred together. His rent was late, his bank account nearly empty, and the bright-eyed optimism he once carried had withered into quiet exhaustion. He spent most of his time wandering the city with his worn-out resume, hoping for luck that never came. That afternoon, when the rain began to fall, he found himself drawn to the park, the one he used to walk through on his lunch breaks. It looked different now, lonelier. The benches glistened with rainwater, the trees stood stripped of leaves, and the air smelled of earth and melancholy. He sat down under a half-broken gazebo, his jacket doing little to keep him dry. He stared at his hands, hands that had once typed reports, shaken clients' palms, and built a career. Now they only trembled with uncertainty. How did it all go so wrong? He whispered. The rain gave no answer, only a steady rhythm of pity. He thought about calling someone, an old coworker, a friend, anyone. But shame stopped him. People were quick to celebrate success, slow to stand beside failure. He didn't notice the man who approached until he spoke. "You look like you could use a little warmth, son." Ethan turned. Standing before him was an older man with silver hair combed neatly back, wearing a thick carpenter's apron under a raincoat. His face was weathered but kind, and his eyes carried a quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving hard things. "I'm fine," Ethan said automatically, forcing a small smile. The man smiled back, unbothered by the lie. "You don't look fine." He handed Ethan a paper cup of steaming coffee and a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. "Here, it's on me." Ethan hesitated. I can't take that. You don't even know me." The man chuckled softly, the sound deep and gentle. "That's exactly why you should take it." Something about his tone, the calm confidence, the way he said it as if it carried a story, made Ethan look up more closely. The face was familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream. But he couldn't place it. "Please," the man added, nodding toward the food. "Humor me. You'll make an old man happy." Ethan accepted the cup with shaking hands, the heat soaking into his skin. The smell of the coffee filled his lungs and eased something tight inside his chest. He took a sip, then a bite of the sandwich. Simple, warm, real. "Thank you," he murmured, eyes lowering in gratitude. The man sat beside him on the bench, folding his hands over his knees. "Rough times." Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "You could say that. Lost my job a year ago. Been looking ever since. Feels like the world's just stopped caring. The man nodded slowly, as though he understood more than he was letting on. The world doesn't stop caring, son. Sometimes it just forgets how to look. Ethan stared into the rain. Maybe. But I think it forgot me completely. There was silence for a few moments, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof. Then the man said quietly, "Do you believe in circles?" Ethan frowned. "Circles? Yeah," the man said with a small smile. "How what you give has a way of coming back. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the way you expect. But life, it remembers." Ethan was about to respond when the man turned slightly, and for the first time Ethan saw the faint scar along his cheek, the same one he'd noticed years ago on the old homeless man near his office. His heart skipped. "Wait," he whispered. "It's you." The man looked at him with gentle amusement. "Took you long enough." Ethan stared in disbelief. I thought, you were sitting by that store every morning. You could barely move." Arthur nodded. "That was me. And you were the young man in the coat who gave me coffee and a sandwich when no one else even looked my way." He smiled softly, eyes glistening with memory. "You changed my life that day." Ethan blinked, speechless. Arthur continued, "That small act, it woke me up. I'd been sitting in that same spot for years, thinking the world was done with me. But you reminded me it wasn't. I went to a shelter that night. Got some help. Someone there connected me with a charity that supported small trades. I picked up my tools again, woodworking, carpentry, the one thing I was still good at. Now I've got a small shop down the road. Nothing fancy, but it's mine." He chuckled quietly. "And every now and then, when I see someone who looks like I did back then, I try to pass the kindness on." Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't even know what to say." Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "Say thank you to yourself. You didn't know it then, but you planted something in me. And here we are, the circle closing." Ethan looked down at the sandwich in his hands. "I thought I'd hit the end of the road," he said softly. "But maybe not." Arthur's eyes twinkled. "You haven't. Sometimes, we just need a reminder that we're still worth something." The rain began to slow, the gray sky softening into pale light. Ethan felt the warmth of the coffee spread through him, deeper than his bones. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about everything that had gone wrong. He was thinking about what could still go right. Arthur stood, stretching his back. "Come by the shop sometime," he said. "I could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing. Nothing big, just honest work. Maybe it'll help you get back on your feet." Ethan blinked, hope flickering in his eyes. "You'd do that for me." Arthur smiled. "You already did it for me." They shook hands, rain dripping from their sleeves. It wasn't just gratitude in that handshake, it was understanding. Two lives, once strangers, now connected by compassion that had traveled years to return home. As Arthur walked away, Ethan sat there, staring at the steaming cup and the gray sky that now seemed a little brighter. The world hadn't forgotten him. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to remind him that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. He took another sip, the warmth blooming in his chest, and whispered into the quiet park, "Karma really does have a good memory." For the first time in a long time, he smiled, not because his problems were gone, but because he finally believed they wouldn't last forever. Kindness had found him once when he least expected it, and now, it had done so again. The circle had closed, and the story of compassion had come full circle, just as it was always meant to.